Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Ask Kati Anything. I'm your host, licensed marriage and family therapist, Kati Morton. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm wondering, have you ever felt ashamed in therapy because you're trying to change, but your behaviors just aren't? Well, that's one of the questions that we're going to talk about today, along with several others from our community. We'll start by discussing what to do when you're struggling with an eating disorder and feel stuck or worried your therapist might give up on you. I'll also explain whether therapists notice changes in things like our body language, behavior, or appearance, and how we bring up concerns if something seems off. We'll talk about the heartbreak that can come from watching someone you love suffer, especially when you can't fix what they're going through. Then we'll get into how past uncomfortable or boundary crossing experiences can affect intimacy in long-term relationships, and whether those experiences might be worth bringing up in therapy. We'll also discuss the idea of ego death and whether experiences like psychedelics or deep meditation can really change how we see ourselves and others. After that, we'll come back to eating disorders and talk about what it might mean if it doesn't feel like a coping mechanism at all. We'll cover therapy questionnaires like the DASS and how helpful they really are in treatment. We'll wrap up by talking about what to do if you feel depression starting to return after a period of feeling okay, especially when the idea of going back to therapy or medication feels overwhelming. Without further ado, let's jump into this first question. Question number 1 says, Hey Kati, I was wondering what you would do if you had a client who can't or won't recover from their eating disorder. I've struggled with restricting and purging for a long time, and I can't seem to stop. My therapist has given me things to work on, like eating at least 2 of my safe snacks a day and not purging, but I can't even do that. I'm so embarrassed to tell her every week that I'm still not changing my behaviors. I genuinely am trying to be better, but in the moment I can't stop myself from acting on the urges, and I feel like such a failure. I'm so scared my therapist is going to stop therapy with me if I don't stop these behaviors. And I notice that I've been lying to her, saying I haven't been purging anymore and that I've been eating when I haven't. I just don't know what to do anymore, and I'm so sorry for the long rant, but thanks so much if you're able to respond. I am able to respond. First of all, I want you to know that this behavior is incredibly normal and common because recovery from an eating disorder is really, really difficult. And even my patients who are in recovery will have slip-ups and kind of go back into the behaviors that we're trying to stop initially. Does that make sense? It's almost like we try to get better and we do, and then we slip up and we keep going forward and we slip up. That's kind of part of recovery process. It's not A, B, C, D, this linear. It's kind of like a swirly, twirly mess. And if I had a patient like you that can't, or I don't know if it's won't, I almost don't even want to say won't recover. I want to say is struggling with recovery from their eating disorder. If I didn't feel like the outpatient sessions that I'm offering, like once or twice a week, is enough, I would refer them to a higher level of care. And I know a lot of people can get scared. We've had members of our community recently go into a higher level of care, and it was, it's a lot to decide to do. I'm always proud of those of you who can do that because it's really life-changing. That would be my push here. I'd push first for you to do some like evening programs. There's quite a few great in the LA area. I used to refer out to what we call like IOP. It's intensive outpatient programs, or a higher level like a PHP, which is partial hospitalization, meaning you go to the facility for either all of, like you live there and sleep there, or for most of your days, like 7 or 8 hours you're there, because you just need more support. And that's okay. It's okay to need more care. It's not that you're not trying. Like you said, in the moment, you just can't stop yourself. And I want you to know that that's kind of why higher levels of care exist. And that's why they're always booked and busy. I don't want you to think that you're weird or strange for needing more support. Needing more support is kind of part of the process. We're just with every patient that I get who has an eating disorder, I feel like I'm trying to figure out what's the best amount of care they need to get them better while still leaving them with as much independence as I can. That's kind of the goal in general, is so that you can try things out in your regular life while also receiving therapeutic support. And so in your case, the therapy that you're receiving isn't enough. It's not on you. It's not like you won't recover or you can't recover. It's that you need more support in the moment. And so I honestly, based on what you're telling me, think that you need either a partial hospitalization. We need to like go and stay at a facility and get treatment, or we at least need a day program maybe, where you can get support around meals. I would encourage you to look into the different programs in your area, maybe ask your therapist if they know of any, because I think that could really be beneficial. That could ensure that instead of you being left to your own devices during mealtime, you have therapeutic support during it to get you through, to push you to eat and not purge. and to encourage you and support you and eat along with you. There's so many different ways we support we call it meal support. I actually have done that in the outpatient basis. I don't know if your therapist would offer this. I don't know if they specialize, but I often would take my patients out to lunch, and then we'd walk back to my office, because my office is in Santa Monica. We'd walk back to it and have a session, and then we'd be done. And yes, I know that can cost more. I didn't charge the full session fee for those meal supports, but it was still time. And then they had me there to encourage them to eat maybe what they might not be able to on their own, and then to sit with them after in session to manage what comes up when we do that. And so I'm just bringing all this up because there's a lot of different ways that we can get support and offer support. And I just want you to know that what this is telling me is that the support that you're getting isn't quite enough. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with you. We just need to find the right level so that you can start making that actual behavioral change. Because I think anybody out there who's listening to this who also struggles with, disordered eating behaviors or full-blown eating disorder, symptoms can attest to the fact that in those moments when you're sitting down and it's just you, it's really, really hard to motivate yourself to act differently. It's really, really hard to not do what the eating disorder is telling you to. And that's why higher levels of care exist. That's why more support is available. So you could ask your therapist if they offer meal support, if they'll go out with you, take you, or if there are other treatment centers that offer day programs, PHPs, IOPs, those are kind of the terms that they use, that we can see if they have beds available or slots available in their programs, and we can get you set up with that. Because it's not about you not being able to tough it out enough. It's the nature of eating disorder treatment, and that's why those treatment centers exist. Okay? Hang in there and keep us posted. Moving on to question number 2. This question says, "Hey, Kati, I hope you're doing well." I hope you're doing well. I am. Getting over a cold. If I sound a little congested, that's why. It says, "I had a question that I was curious about. In therapy sessions, do therapists tend to notice or pay attention to changes in a client's body language, behavior, or appearance over time? For example, things like being quieter than usual, fidgeting more, seeming less engaged, or changes in weight or clothing, like wearing long sleeves on a warm day." Oh, I noticed that. We'll talk about this. Also, are therapists typically able to pick up on possible signs of things like an eating disorder, self-harm, or other mental health struggles, even if the client hasn't talked about it directly yet? If they do notice something that concerns them, how would a therapist usually respond or bring it up with a client? All great questions. I have to speak personally because I think every therapist is a little bit different, and you have to remember that I specialize in the treatment of eating disorders and self-injury work. I, in my private practice, utilize dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, and was pretty clear and direct. So when I have a patient that comes into my office, in their intake, meaning the first session, I'm going to ask them about eating disorder behaviors. I'm going to ask them about self-injury or suicidal thoughts. I'm going to cover those things because that's what I do. And a lot of times, even though a patient will come into me for those things, it doesn't mean that they're going to say it up front, and they often wait to be asked. And some people don't like to be asked, and they'll kind of shy away from it. I usually can tell when it's uncomfortable, and I'll put a little note like, "Come back to this later." I ask up front. So I just want to get that out there, that's how I operate. Not every therapist is going to do that. Not every therapist treats the same types of patients that I do, but that's what I do, okay? And so with that in mind, what I specialize in and how I am as a therapist, I 100% notice. I don't want to say everything because I'm still human, and I'm going to have some days where maybe I'm a little less focused, right? I'm not perfect. But I will always notice if a patient is wearing baggy clothing or long sleeves in winter. I'm going to ask about that. I'm going to ask if they've been struggling with self-injury thoughts. Again, that's like what I treat. And I'll just say, I've noticed, is this because of scars, or is this because of active cutting or active self-injury? Yes, that might seem abrupt or abrasive to some of you, but you have to remember, I start off the conversations in therapy, like the first appointment, with questions like that. And we also need to be reminded that asking someone about something, like asking someone if they have suicidal thoughts, does not make those worse. You can't create those thoughts in someone. I can't all of a sudden touch down and say, "Hey, have you been feeling really down and thinking of taking your life?" and cause that in someone. That's not how that works. We actually find that by asking and speaking up and checking in on people, they're more apt to reach out for care. It actually encourages them, like what they call it, resource access. It's like they reach out and they try to get more support. And so it's better for us to actually just ask directly. And that's what I do. I check in. And so I would say like, hey, I notice you're wearing long sleeves, or hey, you've been fidgeting a lot more. Do you find your anxiety is a little higher? Is there something you're stressed about, nervous about? I just ask straight up. I think sometimes in the not asking things directly, we almost like build the stigma or increase the stigma around something. Like you should be embarrassed. Like I'm embarrassed to ask, or, oh, it's so shameful. I'm not going to say it in hushed tones. I'm just going to ask it straight up. Seems like you're wearing really baggy clothing. Has your eating disorder been raging? Like I just ask stuff like that. Now, it obviously depends on the patient. Everybody's different. If I have someone who's a little more sensitive, I might approach it in a lighter way, but I will always call it out because I know that if it's showing up in my office, it's showing up in your life. And I want, first of all, we know people in our lives can be nosy and ask about things. And so I want you to figure out how to talk about that. I also want you to know there's nothing wrong with talking about it. And this is the one safe space that we have to work on it. And so I'm going to bring it up. Even if you haven't brought it up directly, I don't wait for my patients to bring things up. I mean, I guess I could, but sometimes we'd never talk about things then, right? I'll even personally, my own therapy, sometimes I don't want to talk about something, not because I don't need to, but because it's uncomfortable. And I'm like, how do I say that without them? I don't want them to assume that I have my own judgments. I'm human too, right? But I love it when she asks me directly, because then I can lie. We can lie in therapy. That's normal. It's uncomfortable, right? Or I can also, own up to it. And then it gives me the space to talk about something that's probably important. I feel like the things that I shy away from are the things I should talk about the most. And so overall, I talk about everything. I mention everything. I specifically will notice baggy clothes or long sleeves on a hot day. I worked in Santa Monica. We had a lot of warm days. I had tons of patients who would roll in with like oversized sweatshirts, North Face hoodies and stuff. I would always call it out. I'd be like, awfully warm day for such a warm jacket, let's talk about that. And so I think that in general, I bring it up in a direct and clear but loving way so that it gives them an opportunity to talk about it so that we can address whatever's going on. I think it's kind of the responsibility of the therapist to do that. But again, every therapist is different. Depending on maybe the style of therapy, other therapists might maybe wait for you to bring it up. I just can't imagine ever a situation where that would be beneficial to the patient. Unless you weren't ready to talk about it and you'd already made that clear, then we would give you time. But I think it's really important for every therapist to notice a patient's appearance as it changes over time. Weight gain and loss, changes in your body language or your behavior. That could also be indicative of maybe abuse that's going on or trauma they're sustaining or discomfort at work or something, right? Whether we realize it or not, in our body language and the way that we put ourselves together, we can tell a lot about someone. Like if I had a patient who showed up always put together and then came next time totally like maybe not showered, hair in a messy bun, like in pajamas, I'd be like, whoa, what's going on? It's an indicator. And it's obviously not always that direct or that egregious, but it's still something we should draw attention to. And so in short, I would bring it up and I would respond and address it with compassion, but also directly, because again, I don't want anyone out there to think they need to be embarrassed of a struggle or of a behavior or self-injury, eating disorder. I want you to feel free to talk about it, but I'll probably prod you a little to get you started. Oh, last little thing. As therapists, we are pretty much trained to notice that stuff. Like I want you to know in school, we had a huge, I forget which class it was. I want to say it was the course where we learned about the different treatment modalities, like different types of therapy that you can offer, like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example. I think it was in that course that we also learned to pay attention to body language. And like if a patient sits like on the edge of the couch and like their butt barely touches and they're fidgeting, we're supposed to look for that stuff. Also hygiene. One of the things that I used to have to fill out, like a kind of a questionnaire at the hospital, was about people's hygiene and body activity, like if they're really moving around or if they're not, because that stuff, again, is very important. Okay? Moving on to question number 3. This question says, hey there, Kati. I have a question on how to deal with my heart breaking extremely often when I observed my loved ones in pain or fear. Thank you to Care.com for sponsoring today's episode. I was talking with someone recently about how complicated caregiving can be because it's not just about logistics, it's emotional too. You want to show up for the people you love, especially as they get older, but that doesn't mean you have unlimited time, energy, or resources. And that tension can be really hard to sit with. That's why I appreciate what care.com is doing. It gives you a way to find support without feeling like you have to figure everything out on your own. Whether you're looking for in-home care, help with daily tasks like meals or companionship, or even exploring senior living options, it's all in one place. What I like is that you can actually search for what fits your situation, read reviews, message caregivers, and use their safety tools, including background checks, so you can feel more confident in your decision. They also offer a senior care advisor plan where you get 90 days of guidance from a master's level social worker who can help you build a care plan that makes sense for your family. If you're navigating caregiving in any way, you don't have to do it all alone. For a limited time, go to care.com and use code Kati for 20% off your initial subscription or a senior care advisor plan. That's Kati, all one word, care.com. When it's not you, it's care.com. Moving on to question number 3. This question says, "Hey there, Kati. I have a question on how to deal with my heart breaking extremely often when I observe my loved ones in pain or fear. I try to support as best I can, but there are some things I can't fix. For example, like my elderly mother's physical decline and subsequent depression. I've tried to support her, but ultimately she is facing her own death and is afraid, and I can't stand to see her suffer. I've asked for external support, but she's very reluctant to have therapy, and she is so complex dealing with long-term mental health problems that were never managed, and she also is from the generation where poor mental health was not something you shared." Yeah. "She's extremely dependent on me and my sister, and I'm constantly feeling heartbroken by her sadness." Ugh, I feel this. There are a couple of pieces here. Now, when we love someone, you can only do what you're doing. You can only offer to get her external support. I would push for that. And then this is a tough love answer, okay? Because it's so hard for you, right? If they won't take the help that you're offering, like, "Hey, I can set you up with a therapist. I can get you some support." I mean, you could even say, like, "Mom, people talk about this stuff now." Like it's no reason to be ashamed. You could even share something about yourself or someone else that you mutually know, if it's okay. Like, "Hey, they're in therapy and they're in therapy. A lot of people are in therapy. We go to the doctor. Why wouldn't we work on our brain, which runs our whole body?" I could even have her watch some of my videos. I don't know. But I think just making people aware of the resources available and encouraging that and offering to support it, like, "Hey, I can set it up," or "Hey, I could take you," or whatever needs to happen. Also, if she's in a physical decline, I don't know if she's in hospice or some kind of care like that, but they have therapists and stuff available, and you could let them know and they could approach it too. But in general, after we've offered that care and that support, then we have to figure out how detrimental to our mental health is it to be around that type of energy all the time. I'm not saying don't see your mother. Of course, see your mother, especially physical decline. Like, I want you to be there. But we don't have to be there every waking moment, lighting ourselves on fire to keep them warm, right? And so that's when boundaries will come into place. And maybe if your mom is talking about this, this sadness and this depression and, maybe even suicidal thoughts or things like that, I want you to feel free to say something like, "Mom, this is why I mentioned seeing a therapist. I can't really help you with this, but I'm happy to talk about that and change the subject." Or just change the subject. I know you may feel like, "Hey, I have to be there for her and I have to listen." That's not true. We can get her a professional who can listen and who can support and actually has the tools and the bandwidth to do that because they have boundaries and resources and, we're trained to do it. Let us help. That's what we're here for. And it's okay for you to know your own limits. Because when you said you feel like your heart is constantly broken, I don't want your own depression to maybe, come back to the surface, or I don't want you to not be taking as good a care of yourself because you're busy, worrying about her. I know, and trust me, I feel this too. I'm also an empath, and you feel for people, like, oh, your body hurts for them. But we can't drown ourselves trying to save her. We can't light ourselves on fire to keep her warm, but we can offer the support that we're able. And then when we can't offer it, we either aren't around or we push them out to other resources to be like, see, mom, that's why you should talk to somebody. I promise it's not that scary. Or, share an example. And we can't force anybody to get care. Obviously, we can't control anyone else, but we can control ourselves. And if you find it to be incredibly painful, I want you to just maybe manage how much time you're spending, or at the very least, how much time you're spending in those types of conversations. It might be helpful for you to, I don't know, maybe your mom likes to play cards or do puzzles. You can bring those things and you can have some topics of conversation already ready to go to pull it into that. And if she wants to talk about that, you can be like, Mom, I'll set you up with a therapist. That can be your go-to answer. And then we can pull it back to something else very lovingly. This isn't like, I can't talk to you about this, Mom. But if it's like a broken record and it's really hard for you and your heart breaks for her and you don't know what else to do, there's no really help or there's no benefit to going down that road. So it might be better if we just keep pushing her out to other support and talk about other things. Like, oh my God, I saw my cousin the other week and she was saying about this, or, oh my goodness, I read this interesting article, right? Like, have some topics that you can talk about that you think that she would enjoy also, because, going down that road isn't really giving us anything and it's not really helping anyone. It's making you feel worse. Maybe it's making her feel worse. And so that's what I would really do. I know it's hard. I know you love her and you want to do everything, but you're already doing the best you can. So let's not light ourselves on fire to keep her warm. Okay. Let's move on to question number 4. It says, hey, Kati, I hope you're doing okay. I am. I am a grown-up adult. Me too. Isn't that weird? I'm female who has never had sex in her life. I've been in a relationship for almost 20 years now, but we came only once close to doing it, and we couldn't because I couldn't. My boyfriend asked me afterwards if I've had some bad experiences in my past, which I, at the time, denied. To this day, we still struggle doing it because even the thought of it makes me very uncomfortable. I'm not asexual, though I do have autism. That might be important. And every now and then, I do masturbate. Okay, so we do have the urge, we have the desire, but somehow doing it with my partner just feels somewhat wrong and a bit scary. Plus, I'm constantly under the impression that he always comes close with the intention we could end up doing it. Over the past years, some memories have come back. At age 16, I had a very uncomfortable situation with my coach who asked whether he could hug me, though this turned out to be a way too intimate hug, and he wouldn't stop for a couple of minutes, and I left feeling very shaken. A couple years later, I had an experience where I was accidentally close to a one-night stand, which I didn't realize until he started touching and kissing me intensely. I said no and could leave, though this too left me pretty shaken. I was wondering if these only two incidents might have been some form of abuse, though I was never touched by both men underneath my clothes. You don't have to be. And whether my reluctance to intimacy with my partner might stem from that. Do you think this is something I should tell my therapist? I'm just so ashamed. Sorry, this is such a long question, and thank you for your thoughts. Of course. A couple of things. I don't ever want to downplay any instances that we have in our life that could affect our abilities or even interest in having intimacy with our loved ones. So are those two incidents enough to form this kind of issue with intimacy or reluctance? Possibly. Only you know the answer. And so my tough answer to this question is that I want you to consider, because there's a certain phrase that I want to come back to. You said that I'm not asexual. Okay, but somehow doing it with my partner, this is after you said that you do masturbate sometimes, so you do have sexual interest, right? Or at least sexual desire. Somehow doing it with my partner just feels somewhat wrong and a bit scary. Now, I'm really curious what that means, because you're saying it feels somewhat wrong, and I want you also to be very, very curious about what you mean by that, because those are your honest feelings. It just feels somewhat wrong and a bit scary. Okay, where do we think that comes from? When did this start? It's obviously been 20 years, so it's been a long time. I do also want to flag that sometimes I find, at least in my experience with my patients, that as years go by where we aren't able to do something, and every time we try, we can't. It's almost like we're reinforcing this, like, I can't, it's overwhelming. And so these 20 years of being with your partner and him being very understanding and like you building up and then not doing it, unfortunately could be reinforcing this belief that it's like somewhat wrong or scary or, I can't do it. So I just want to flag that there. But I want you to spend some time journaling or at least just thinking about what about sex with your partner or intimacy of any kind. I don't know how far you get or what you're able to do or not, but what about that feels wrong? Specifically wrong. And you put that in quotes. And I'm also curious why we put it in quotes. Is it that, because if you masturbate, so does it feel okay to do something on your own, but when you have someone else involved, is there any maybe religious trauma? That's where my brain went when I first read it before reading your other instances. I've had a lot of patients, and even myself, like growing up in kind of that purity culture in the 90s, and there can be a lot of judgment or like sex is dirty and it's wrong. And so we can have a lot of these beliefs thinking that intimacy with someone, even if they're loving and caring and we've been with them for a long time, that it's wrong or dirty or, something that we shouldn't be doing. I don't know. I'm just posing some questions, some thoughts. I feel like in general, when it comes to, intimacy, but any behavior in general where we don't have an idea of where it stems from, I want us all to be curious about it. When we jump to judge and we think like, oh my God, what the hell is wrong with me? Why can't I do this? That doesn't get us anywhere, right? That isn't a truth-seeking internal conversation. A truth-seeking internal conversation is something like, that's interesting. Where could that have come from? I wonder when that started. I want you to think of yourself as like an internal detective. We don't know. We're trying to figure it out. We're trying to get the evidence that we need to prove our case as to why this feels wrong or why it feels a bit scary. Now, could it be from these two incidences? Possibly, but I don't want you to jump to that conclusion. I want you to be curious about it. As you wrote that to me, did you think that those fed into what we're struggling with now? Is it possible? Yes, maybe it's possible. Do you feel that connection? Or is it something that you maybe were told growing up, like I said, maybe religious beliefs or religious trauma or something else? Again, those are just some ideas that I have, but your experience. And then when you say scary, so we're going to do quote unquote wrong first, then we're going to move into scary. What about intimacy is scary? Do you feel like if you initiate it, then you can't stop midway? Or if all of a sudden it becomes uncomfortable, we can't say that we don't want to. That could be helpful too. Let's again be curious about that response or that reaction that we're having. And a tool that I've pushed people to over the years is I know that we don't know if we've had any childhood sexual abuse. You don't feel like you have, but you had those two instances when you were a teenager. But at the back of the Courage to Heal workbook, they offer this great resource for building our intimacy back. And I also utilize it in my book, Traumatized. I talk about it there too. So if you have that book, it's towards the end of that book. Anyway, I think it's chapter 20 of Courage to Heal workbook, and it's towards the end of my Traumatized book. They have us put together when we're trying to build intimacy after trauma or after abuse. We break it into 3 columns. Now, the first column is touch or sexual behaviors that feel okay. So that could be anything like a hug, holding hands, kissing, maybe kissing on the cheek. It depends. Depends on you. Depends on what's comfortable. Put all the things that you're okay with doing. It could be a really long list or it could be short. No judgment. We're just thinking about our process and what sexual behaviors are okay. Then we move into the middle column, which are behaviors, acts that maybe are okay. Maybe that's not something we've done before, so we don't really know if we're okay with it. Put those in there. Things that maybe we haven't tried. Maybe it's things we have tried and we had to pull out, we had to stop. And then the third are the things that are not okay. So for you, that'd be sex. I also would encourage you to maybe stop using the term doing it and start using the term sex or intercourse or whatever you're comfortable with. But I find the language to be kind of important here as well. Doing it gives me a very, and this is not a judgment, but it's like a very childlike term. And then it makes me curious as a therapist if our concern about sex comes from childhood in some way, like maybe teen years, like you said, when you were 16. Because doing it, yes, I know what you mean, but it's okay to say sex. There's nothing wrong with that. And if that makes you embarrassed, then I'd be curious why. Again, this is not the time for any judgment. This is the time to get curious about those reactions that we have. We often have these like automatic responses to our world and our experience. And the real key therapeutic piece here is that instead of judging ourselves for that reaction or response, we get curious about it. And we think, oh, that's interesting. I wonder where that comes from. Again, think of it almost like you're an alien to this world and you're witnessing this reaction. You're like, I wonder why they did that. I wonder why they felt that way. Right? That really removes that judgment piece from it and allows us instead to discover the answer. Because when we have these kind of what feels like an innate response or reaction, we don't give it any thought. It just happens. And then when we judge it, it almost shuts us down and we feel shame or blame or embarrassment, and that doesn't move us forward. And so instead of having that shame, blame, and embarrassment, we're hoping to open it up to more curiosity, where then we discover maybe the cause or the root of it, because that's what you're trying to figure out, like, where did this come from? And we're going to figure that out through curiosity, not judgment. And so my homework for you is to start journaling about this. Start being curious. You can create those 3 columns, things that are okay, not maybe okay, and not okay. That can help. You can share that with your partner. That's actually really helpful for them to know. And yeah, let's just see where this comes from. I wish I could tell you if those 2 incidences, are enough to cause this. It's possible, but only you really know, right? I can't ever tell you what the impact was. That's why 2 people can go through the same traumatic experience and one can walk out completely traumatized and develop PTSD, and the other person can walk away what looks like unscathed, right? They're shocked in the moment and upset, but then they're able to process it and move forward. And we can think, how is that possible? But a lot of that has to do with their level of resilience, their support system, any other pre-existing mental illnesses they might be struggling with. And so I can't tell you whether 1 instance or 2 instances are going to be enough to cause this, because all of those factors play a role, right? Resilience, support, mental illness, other struggles, issues we're going through at that time. All of that, whether we felt like we could tell somebody about it, that plays a huge role. And so I won't know, because each person is so unique. And I know that's an annoying answer, but that is the answer, okay? But be a little curious and let us know what you find out. Or if you have other follow-ups, I'm happy to keep talking about this. And no reason to be ashamed of it. I would tell your therapist if you could. You might want to, again, journal about this and practice saying it out loud. Sometimes it's hard to say things out loud for the first time. We can hear the words come across our lips and be like, ah. And so you might want to practice in your car on your own. But I would try to tell them, and just know that it can and will get better. Oftentimes we just don't realize where those reactions are coming from. But once we do, then we can find our way out. Okay? Moving on to question number 5. This question says, hey, Kati, a little while back, I brought up a question about ego death. I remember this very clearly. This episode is brought to you by Hero Bread. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about how important it is to feel nourished and satisfied throughout the day. Not just full, but actually steady. And for many of us, that can come down to getting enough fiber and protein in a way that feels doable and not overwhelming. Because food shouldn't feel stressful or overly complicated. We want meals that are comforting, familiar, and that actually keep us going. That's something I've really appreciated about Hero Bread. I can still have the meals I enjoy, like toast in the morning, sandwiches for lunch, or wraps for dinner, but they help me stay fuller longer and feel more supported nutritionally. Their products have 0 to 5 grams net carbs, 0 grams of sugar, and 11 to 32 grams of fiber, which can make a big difference in keeping you feeling satisfied. And all I have to say is that the texture really surprised me. It's soft, fluffy, and feels like the bread you're used to. There's no sense of missing out or having to swap for something that doesn't feel as good. They also have a range of options like sliced bread, tortillas, bagels, and even Hero noodles, which have 12 grams of protein and just 80 calories per serving, so it's easy to find something that fits into your routine. If you're looking for simple ways to support your body and feel a bit more steady throughout the day, you can get 10% off your order by going to hero.co and using code Kati at checkout. That's Kati at HER.co. Moving on to question number 5, this question says, hey, Kati, a little while back, I brought up a question about ego death. I remember this very clearly. I want to go into it more. It is my understanding that everyone has an ego, correct? The ego is our identity, the I am. Once that ego dies or experiences dissolution from psychedelics, deep meditation, or near-death experiences, we quote unquote wake up and become aware that we are more than our identity. We are connected, not separate. I believe that if everyone has this one experience, people will become more empathetic. Also, we become more aware of our own patterns and are able to filter out our own negative thought patterns by replacing old habits with healthier habits. What are your thoughts? I agree and disagree with you. Now, yes, the ego is kind of the like puffer chest, the I am, the identity piece of who we are, right? And it can get in the way of things sometimes because if we have a certain belief about ourselves, then it can be hard for us to see around it, right? Our ego is in the way and we're like, no, this is who I am. This is what I do, blah, 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 right? And a lot of the research, and if you guys didn't hear the podcast I did with my good friend, Dr. Alexa Altman, and her partner in business, Shira, I think Myro is her last name. They do psychedelic research and ketamine treatments and all sorts of things. And they talked exclusively about the fact that the really powerful piece of that work is that it allows people to put their ego aside during the treatment. Now, from what I understand from their research, that ego comes back. It doesn't mean that it still acts in the same way. However, I don't believe we can ever fully remove our ego. We're always going to have a sense of identity, but we might have a different perspective, and our identity can shift. And the way that we want to interact with people can change over time. And thank God, right? My ego of my teens and my early 20s was different than now, and I'm grateful for it. I feel like it's better now. And so I think it is important for us to be able to shift that and to maybe sidestep it. And I think it's a really powerful therapeutic tool to have it pushed to the side for a bit. I don't really know if I think that it ever dies. It's funny because I don't remember my answer before, but I suspect it's very similar. But also my thoughts on this too are that, yes, I think it's helpful for everyone to be able to have that kind of wake-up call, but there are going to be, obviously everybody's different. And psychedelic treatment is not 100% effective. I also don't think deep meditation is 100% effective. Nothing in therapy or in our world, even in medical treatment in general, is 100% effective. And so I don't believe that, having any of those experiences are going to wake everybody up, but I do think it shifts things. One thing, I read this article, God, I'd have to try to find it, and I don't know if I can, but you can fact check me on this. But I'd read this article about people who had experienced near-death experiences, and their life was forever shifted. But I want to say it was after like 5 or 6 years, they found themselves kind of back to where they were before. And I think if we don't want to change, if we don't want to shift our identity or our ego or our belief about self, we will go back into the rut of what it was before. And so I really think that, yes, it could be incredibly helpful. I think all of us should consider who we believe ourselves to be, and if that's a healthy thing, and if we are, letting our ego get in the way of connection and support and honesty, then maybe it's something that we need to reconsider. But we all are connected. We're not separate. I believe that. And I think a lot of this just has to do with belief about self and belief about environment. And I don't know if it's ego death that would help with that, or psychedelics or any of that. I think there's a ton of different reasons that people can experience that type of thing. I guess those are my thoughts. I think that one thing could help everybody and everybody feel more connected and be more aware of their patterns and be able to filter out negative. That's kind of like magic wanding it. I don't think it's quite so black and white. Also, think of like narcissists and people with antisocial personality disorder that would not be interested in this at all. And I don't know, based on their pathology, I'm not sure if psychedelics would even help. I'm not sure. And they might even fake that it helped. Who knows? They can be really manipulative. So who knows? But I think it is beneficial. When there's benefits to some, I think that definitely helps others. And every person who alters their identity to be more loving and supportive and connected is going to impact other people's, like the ripple effect, right? And so I do think that that's all good stuff. But those are my thoughts. Thanks for the great question. It's always interesting just to think about, Moving on to question number 6. It says, "Hi, Katie. I hope you're well." I hope you're well. I am well. I have been wondering about this for a while. What if I don't feel like my eating disorder is a coping mechanism? Mine is that I don't like any extra weight. I only like my thinness. Extreme thinness. I don't feel like I'm trying to cope with anything in particular at all. I don't mean to giggle. We'll talk about this. I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing with you because this is like so incredibly common. I'm a bit sad, of course, and I don't have food freedom and I'm not a better person. But yeah, I'm really not trying to cope with anything. I don't remember feeling like there's anything I'm trying to avoid thinking or feeling for many years. I feel like I just cannot stand any extra flesh on my body. I really hope you choose this question. What else could be going on? I'm very curious about what extra weight means to you. Why are you only able to tolerate extreme thinness? And then I could even argue very easily that if you're only able to tolerate extreme thinness, then your eating disorder distracts you. It's a coping mechanism for that. It's trying to keep you focused on thinness because that's all you can tolerate. Again, if you can't tolerate, what would be not thin feel like to you? And then your eating disorder is numbing you out from those feelings. The discomfort, the agitation. Are there some judgments? Do you have beliefs about self? I'm curious what your family of origin, like what are the conversations about weight and food? I'm curious if your family is all very thin or very heavy. I'm curious about what your family, like growing up, was like. How did they talk about food? How do they act around food? I'm very interested in this because I know we say coping mechanism and you could think like, oh, I'm trying to cope with this tough thing. No, an eating disorder is a way, it's a coping mechanism, but maybe it's better if we call it like a numb out. Because if you're so focused on being extremely thin, I doubt that you're able to ever really feel any emotions. Like if I asked you, what are 5 emotions you felt today? Would that be hard for you or easy for you? You know, again, just because an eating disorder, I believe, is a coping mechanism, but maybe it's just the way we're talking about it that doesn't quite hit home for you. It doesn't resonate. You don't feel like that's true for you, and that's fair. Everybody's different. Yours has something to do, my argument would, my guess is, this is just my eating disorder therapist brain. I am thinking that because you don't like any extra weight, I am curious, again, like, what feelings come up about having extra weight on your body. Has anybody ever commented? Everybody's been commented on, but are there certain memories you have about someone mentioning someone's weight or your own, or grabbing on to someone? Like I had a patient for years who had her abuser grab on to her arm or her side and say, oh, you're just the cutest. She did not want anybody grabbing anything. And that fed into the eating disorder. Now, obviously, the grabbing, having the extra skin, quote unquote extra skin, feeling heavy, made her want to lose weight because that made her feel safer. And it also helped her numb out from the abuse. Now, I even had a patient who, because of her father's behavior around food and the fact that he wouldn't let anybody else eat dessert if they hadn't worked out that day, she felt like she had to earn food. So there was a lot of exercise addiction and stuff like that. And there was no overt abuse in her family. So she didn't feel like it was coping in that way either. But it was her belief in her relationship with food. And that's why I'm going back to the fact that you do have some kind of beliefs in your system somewhere about being heavy or having extra weight or not only being extremely thin. I don't know what, even when you talk about that, like you can only deal with that. You don't like it. You said, I only like this way. Well, what if you couldn't be extremely thin? What if all of a sudden I threw, a fat suit on you? How would you feel about that? What beliefs do you have? What emotions come up for you? Because again, our eating disorder has us focus so much on the food, the exercise, the whatever it is, so that we can't think about the other thing. It's a way to control. In yours, it's definitely very related to control. And I wonder if you were put into treatment and you were forced to eat regular meals and snacks, if you would feel very out of control. I've had that happen with a lot of my patients. You have no food freedom, like you said. So it's not like you can go out to eat out to dinner with people and just eat and have a good time and be present. You'd be only thinking about food. So it's still helping you cope. You're numbing out from something. It's focusing all your energy on this. I guess I'm just curious what we don't want. Is it we don't want to feel any emotions? Is it that we attribute anything but extreme thinness as laziness, or I don't know, we have some kind of beliefs, and I'm curious where those beliefs came from. And that therein lies the root of yours. your eating disorder has, there's a reason it exists. It might just not feel as direct, not as direct of a coping skill or coping mechanism. Yours is a distraction and based on someone else's, I believe, thoughts and beliefs about weight. And I just don't know where it came from. But my guess is that somewhere in your family, somebody was, like I said, were they really, really skinny? Were they really, really heavy? Was there some kind of conversation around food? Like that, that's why I gave you some examples from my patients over the years. We have to be curious, because I would again be really surprised if you're able to feel anything. Because you said, I don't feel like there's anything I'm trying to avoid thinking or feeling for many years. I bet you haven't felt or thought for many years in that way. I think that's what your eating disorder's pulling you into. You just focus on it. I don't have any bad thoughts or feelings. Yeah, because you're in the grips of your eating disorder. Does that make sense? Our eating disorder removes all upset, removes all distraction, removes all unwanted feelings for a period of time. So much so that it can really erode our lives. I think I talked about this in the last podcast, but so many of us, when we're in the grips of our eating disorder, we can struggle to connect with people. We can go out to dinner and we don't remember anything that was said. We can't be present for those we love because we're so focused on thinking about food and exercise or whatever behaviors, binging, purging, things that come up. We're in another dimension. It's like, that thing when you have something that's on your mind and you can't quite solve it and it's like in the back running. And so someone's talking to us and we're like, we're not even absorbing it. That's like what an eating disorder. It's like it's talking constantly, makes it really hard for us to focus on the task at hand, on the conversation at hand. And it can make us really disconnected from the people we love the most. And so when you say, I don't think my eating disorder has helped me cope with anything. My question is, are you able to participate in your life in a full way? Do you have real conversations where you feel connected? Are you able to sit down for dinner with a friend and not be freaking out about the food and what's in it and looking at the menu for way too long? Or are you able to just order, eat, and talk, right? Your eating disorder is really affecting your ability to function. It is getting in the way. Whether or not it's a full coping mechanism is kind of besides the point. It's there to help you, to distract you from something. So what is that something? I don't know. Only you know. You have the answers. But I would just be a little bit curious, again, not judgmental about this. What's it helping you ignore? Because our eating disorders are really good at pulling our attention and having us ignore something that's uncomfortable. And that's really what a coping mechanism is, but maybe using that word just does not feel like it resonates. And so instead maybe think, what is my eating disorder distracting me from? Because it's doing a damn good job because I'm not sure what it is. And we have to kind of be curious. I always challenge my patients when we have like challenge meals or meal supports where I go out with them and we eat something. I'm always curious what comes up right after that meal. How are you feeling? What are you thinking? Because usually you're freaking out. And then that gives us a kind of a way in or a little idea of what our eating disorder is doing, what purpose it's serving. I hope that helps and makes sense. I know it's tricky, but they always have a purpose. They're always there to numb us out or distract us from the real feelings. And it can sometimes just take us a while to figure out what those are. Okay? Keep us posted. Moving on to question number 7. This question says, Kati, how much does a therapist usually rely on DASS scores? Now, I had to look this up. DASS scores. It says, or other questionnaires. Now, a DASS score stands for Depression, Anxiety, and Stress Scale. So DASS. And it's funny, when I looked this up, all of the references referred to Bristol and places in Australia. And I'm saying that because now the question goes on, how much can or should we rely on them? I'm in Australia and DASS 21 is often used here for insurance purposes, but I've realized that my therapist also likes to use questionnaires of her own accord during our sessions. DASS 21 and sometimes others. She uses my scores to determine my level of burnout, depression, etc. I don't mind doing them, but I often find the questionnaires have some odd or specifically worded questions which I'm not sure how to answer. They don't feel like the most accurate representation of my real life. I agree. I end up scoring them quite similarly each time. That's normal. Sometimes I feel like it's being used instead of actually unpacking my situation. And talking about it. Because after scoring, she talks about the result and maybe some of the specific questions, which may or may not feel super relevant to me at the time. Do you have any tips for me to work around this in my sessions? And I know the surveys are researched and validated, so am I just being difficult? No. Okay. I have a lot of feelings about this. Now, we in the States I'm not familiar with the DASS. I had to look it up, but I am familiar with other questionnaires and things that we have used over the years. Some people have, certain depression scales they prefer to use. I feel like almost every clinician will have some preferred questionnaires that they like to utilize. Now, it's interesting that you said that she has you do them, it sounds like every session. Is that right? I'm not sure if you said every session, but I would have my patients do them maybe once a year or maybe 6 months, just depending, to kind of see how they're doing. Because I came to be a therapist with the Beck depression scale. That was what we utilized. That's what I learned. Also, there's some other anxiety scales I've utilized over the years, kind of just depending. I also used to have this self-injury scale that I would use to determine how much my patients were struggling. I think they're helpful when it comes to just like a brief little check-in, but they're not really great on full treatment assessment or how a patient is really doing. To your point where you feel like some of the questions just aren't really relevant, you're not sure how to answer, and then you're like, is this really helping? No, and you're not being difficult. I do not believe personally, that therapy should always revolve around a questionnaire. I think questionnaires are good, like temperature checks. Like, how are we doing? Is this resonating? Is our depression or anxiety lifting? Has our suicidality come down since we started working together? I honestly see those scales as more of like a temperature check for how effective my treatment has been and maybe how leaned in you are. That in no way affects the treatment that I'm offering directly. Does that make sense? It's almost like I use the scales to kind of give me an idea, and then I might change some of the things that I'm doing in my treatment that have nothing to do with the scale. It's more just like, hey, is this getting better? Good. But I also would never lean fully into a questionnaire. I'd always ask my patient, like, hey, how are you doing? Are you feeling better? What things do you think have improved? And we might look through the work we've done together and see how far we've come. I talk about that all the time, how important I think that is to keep us moving in therapy and keep us motivated, is to sometimes look back on our old notes and old session homework things and be like, oh my God, look, remember we were working on this? That's now so easy for you. Like, amazing, right? We want to celebrate those wins, and sometimes we lose perspective because we're like in it. And so overall, I want you to know that your therapist is probably using this DASS or questionnaires because it's required for insurance purposes, but I would let them know that you don't really like it. They can still use it for insurance purposes, right? You can use a questionnaire and not have it, I don't know, connect to the treatment, right? Kind of like I would do it. Like, it'd be like a temperature check, and then I'd ask them how they're doing separate. And then I'm also constantly assessing whether the homework assignments or the different, kind of tools or resources we're utilizing in session, if it's even working. Are we getting better, right? And the questionnaires can help with that, but you also just have a conversation. So no, you're not being difficult. Honestly, could even say I've had tons of patients where I've never even used a questionnaire. They're not required through insurances in the States. Thank God. But they are utilized sometimes to just kind of get a baseline and check in periodically. And I think that personally, I feel like that's how they should be used. I don't think we should lean into questionnaires to do everything, because there's going to be questions that don't apply, and there's going to be things we don't know how to answer. And a real conversation with your therapist will go a lot farther than some random score from something that someone put together to help assess depression, anxiety. Yes, it can gives us a baseline, but doesn't really give us I would say in therapy or in when I was taking, my classes in school, you would say this is quantitative. Like the DASS gives you a number. It's quantitative. It's a quantity. It's not qualitative. We're not getting like the real breadth of the data. We're not really understanding how you're doing. And I think that those are the limitations of things like that. And I think that's the problem that I have with them being utilized so maybe rigidly, if that's even the right word. I'm not sure if they're using them every session, but I would just mention it to your therapist. I let them know, like, hey, I know you have to use this sometimes, but I don't like it. I don't find it helpful. I find that a lot of the questions aren't really relevant. Some of them are worded really strangely, and I'm not even sure how to answer them. Yeah. And you say, I'd rather you just talk to me and we can assess, I can fill it out, but then I'd really love to have a conversation. It's okay to say that stuff. A therapist might have to utilize things to get coverage, and that's fair. But that doesn't mean that she has to do the rest of that, right? The conversations and the time that she spends with you don't have to revolve around this stupid questionnaire. We can take it in any direction that we want. Okay? Surveys can be helpful, but I don't believe they should be the meat of therapy by any means. Like I said, I've been tons of patients I don't even use them on, and I think I've maybe used them on like a handful. It's more just to check in, and I do a better job myself. So yeah. Okay. Moving on to our final question. Question number 8 says, Kati, hey, how are you? I'm good. How are you? It says, what would you say to someone that's experiencing depression again? My depression is coming back after almost 2 years of being okay, and I don't have the courage to get help because I don't want to experience therapy and medication all over again. I really need to get help, but I'm not strong enough to go through all of that again. Sorry if my English is confusing. It's my second language and I'm still learning. Your English is impeccable and beautiful. And I saw there was a comment under this that said the same. So wonderful job. To be truthful, your depression isn't coming back, it's back. And that's why you don't want to do therapy and medication again. Isn't depression such an asshole? I swear to God, it swoops in and knocks out all hope, all motivation, all, I guess hope's what I said, but it's like seeing to the future. It robs us. Depression's such a piece of trash. It comes in and takes all our light. It tells us nothing's going to get better, that you can't do it. It's super fucking heavy. It's like putting on a backpack and you're like trying to walk, and like even showering just feels like it's just too much. And that's why you're telling me I'm not strong enough to go through all that anymore. I can't do therapy and medication again. I'm here to tell you your depression's lying to you. You do have the strength. It's trying to snuff out your light. It's trying to do what depression does, make you feel like you can't do anything, that everything's extra work, that I don't have the oomph to get out of bed or the extra to do stuff after work. I'm just barely surviving. And that's why we need that therapy and medication. If we had stuff that worked before, I'm very curious why we went off our medication. I know I talk about this a lot and I'm not a doctor, but it's very important that we don't go off our medication without talking to our doctor. And if we're feeling better, I always want to ask that question, like, why would you go off of it? If we have a medication that is lifting our symptoms of depression or removing our symptoms of anxiety or helping us better manage our ADHD or whatever, why would we go off of it? We don't judge people for taking a medication for their blood pressure or for their diabetes. Why do we do that for mental health? It's no different. And so if you are feeling better, it's okay to stay on your meds. In fact, I would encourage it. I know not everybody has to be on their medication for their life. Okay, we don't have to sign up forever. But if it's helping you now, I would encourage you to stay on it. And so if you had medication that was working for you and you were doing better, and I assume you had a therapist before, and if you liked them and it was helpful, let's get back into that regimen, whatever it was. And I don't know the process. If English is your second language, I'm not sure if you're in the States or if you're somewhere else, but let's start that process again. Let's call that doctor, call that therapist. Let's get you back in that. I know it's exhausting. I know you don't want to. If someone in your life can make those calls for you, let them do it. If you can do it online, let's do it that way. But my goal for you this next week is to put those calls in or to make those appointments online, whether it's on your phone or whatever. I want you, that's my goal. Those are the two things I want you to do is call the doctor who prescribed that medication, see if you can get it refilled, and call your therapist and schedule an appointment. I know those are two big items. I give you 2 weeks to get it done. I'd like you to do it in a week. Extra credit for a week, but we'll give you 2 weeks to do it because your depression is back and it's robbing you of your ability to see into the future, to be excited about it, to hope for more, to feel like you can actually help yourself get better. Depression's just such an asshole, you know? I recently had a bout of it again, and it's interesting because I think sometimes we forget how heavy it is, how annoying it is, how much it just like, it just is the worst. And I'm so sorry. I know that feeling. I know that you're feeling like it's just too much effort, but I just want you to know that you can push through. And you can also ask for someone to help you. But I can tell you a million times over, it'd be way easier if you could make the appointment on your computer versus having to make a call. Let's hope you can do that. But either way, I want you to maybe start looking up those numbers and looking up that, how you go about that. And then maybe the next week we make that call or we send that email or whatever. Let's get you back into it. You are strong enough to go through all that again. Don't let your depression tell you different. It can and will get better. It got better before. It's been 2 years. You've been okay. So let's get you back to being okay. Okay? Thank you all so much for listening and watching. Thank you for shopping our sponsors. It really does help. Thank you for leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts and telling your friends about it. All of that is lovely and wonderful. I hope you have a wonderful week. Do your homework, and I'll see you next time.